Hi there, this is Esther Muñoz from the University of Zaragoza, and first of all, thank you very much for this opportunity to be here, this chance to be here in this conference revisiting the dystopian genre. The title of my presentation is Margaret Atwood's MaddAddam, Liberatory or Conservative Ending. Margaret Atwood's first dystopian novel, The Handmaid's Tale, was one of the novels that marked the dystopian turn in the 1980s writing of fiction. Although Moylan still classifies The Handmaid's Tale as a classical dystopia, mainly for reasons related with its publication date, other critics, such as Baccolini and Cavalcanti, inscribe Atwood's novel within another specific label, the critical dystopia. The critical dystopia is a variant within dystopian fictions in which the discourse still retains a hope for a better future, and it is precisely in the presence of a non-yet defeated utopian core in an open-ended narrative that more distinguishes the feminist dystopia specificity. According to Moore, these new feminist dystopias map not a single path, but rather several motions and changes that may lead to a potentially better future. That is, the utopian mood would be still alive, particularly in the modern feminist dystopias, in a new derivation within the genre that Moore calls transgressive utopian dystopias. Atwood herself acknowledges the frequent hybridity of utopia and dystopia in what she calls astopia, that is, a combination of the imagined perfect future and its opposite. The novel MaddAddam opens the story which, according to Moore, I quote, the actual process of building utopia, unquote. In MaddAddam, the Quakers, a highly ecological humanoid species created in a laboratory by Craig, to take over the human race, and some human survivors are grouped together in the fight for survival. The violent paintballers, biogenetically created wild animals like the pea-goons, constitute the main dangers for the existence of the new community. At the end of the trilogy, MaddAddam miscegenated society is born from a combination of humans, Quakers, their habit spring, and a non-transgression pact of friendship with the pea-goons, now integrated as full members of the community. The trilogy's ending conveys the positive, utopian, or negative, dystopian mood that determines the novel's belonging to a specific genre, and what is more, its ideological message. Traditionally, an ending offering multiple possibilities would easily categorize a work of fiction into the transgressive and liberal corner. However, as Brian Richardson remarks, and I quote, close endings with fixed solutions were inherently conservative, while open endings were necessarily liberatory. But open endings soon became widespread, even conventional, unquote. I would like to discuss whether the ending, MaddAddam's ending, by resisting closure, could be understood as utopian, that is belonging to a feminist critical dystopia, or the other way round, an ending displaying a dystopian core in an ironic demonstration of the impossibility of changing human nature for the better. The narrative world depicted after the Anthropocene frontier in MaddAddam can be interpreted mainly as dystopian, especially for women. In order to assess this hypothesis, I will consider the characterization and the depiction of human women and their place and role in the new society created after the apocalypse, after the waterless flood. Toby, a woman, is the most skillful and strongly ethical character in the novel, in the trilogy, not only in the novel. Physically, she's skinny, muscular, and not sexually eye-catching. Moreover, her body is described as almost androgynous. According to McCoy Anderson, Toby occupies a liminal third space between the masculine and the feminine, which seems to question the Western binary thinking that links male with agency and females with passivity. However, the mere act of qualifying Toby, a slender woman with small breasts, as androgynous can be another way of perpetuating stereotypes and describing women through men's eyes and expectations. Furthermore, the idea of attaching skillfulness, resolution, and capacity of survival to the only woman in the story that is not sexually attractive and fertile, that is, to the masculinized woman, may reinforce gender binary thinking. In other words, standardly beautiful and fertile women are once again relegated to the role of being guided and cared for by men, and now by the masculinized woman as well. Nevertheless, in spite of Toby's non-standard appearance, she is not actually neutral or liminal in her sexuality or feelings. What is more, she would have internalized patriarchal expectations, both for her and for other women, to the point that at the end of the novel she has become an ugly duckling or a Cinderella, since the denouement, the ending of her story, comes ironically close to a romantic fairy tale. In the pre-apocalypse time, Toby was raped several times and thus deprived of her body's ownership. Her boss, Blanco, exerts brutality and abuse over everyone around him, but only women suffer his sexual violence. Moreover, when Toby is rescued by the gods' gardeners, she goes through another episode of molestation attempt. This time the rape is not perpetrated, and Pilar, a high-rank gods' gardener woman, recommends Toby to forget about the incident. Laurie V. Crow highlights how Atwood recurrently reveals and considers the subject of women's vulnerability to physical, sexual, and psychological violence in situations of male domination. Atwood's protagonists are often sexually abused, and the MaddAddam trilogy is not an exception. Toby, Amanda, and Ren, female narrators and focalizers through the trilogy, are raped. Nevertheless, although Amanda and Ren are sexually assaulted by the Quakers, these rapes are minimized, devoid of any significance, and forgiven. Amanda and Ren are encouraged not to make too much a fuss about the incident. Toby adapts to her situation by becoming a tougher person. She produces a self that is split between an aging and neutral outside and a careful and tender inside. But she is always touched by the presence of children. After being raped by Blanco, she is welcomed by God's gardener's children. This asexual and friendly physical contact becomes the first instance of a clear, touching emotion in Toby, the first crack on her shell. She relieves and expands this emotional link with her mother-like relationship with little Blackbeard, a Quaker child, to the point that she feels sadness when she recognizes in him the signs of adulthood, and consequently the end of her motherhood. However, Toby does not sympathize with visually appealing females. It is an ambivalent feeling that ranges from envy to moral superiority complex that Toby shows especially after Waterloo's flood, with the more threatening woman for her, the young and fertile swift fox. After the apocalypse, Toby's body is not only anodyne, but is also aging. Toby uses self-deprecating humor in the construction of her identity through interaction between herself and the younger woman, because women learn to see themselves and other women through men's eyes, according to Davis. And she has internalized the stereotypes for middle-aged women. As we can see in this quotation, Toby, the sexually invisible woman, has been silently in love with Seth from the very moment she met him. After the pandemic, when she has already had sexual intercourse with him, she is insecure of her own value and attractiveness because Seth is an alpha man. This is why she suffers and is resentful towards the woman who may be her rival for Seth's attentions. That is Sweet Fox, as we can see in this quotation. In a time in which fertility seems to be the most valuable thing, Toby, infertile and older than her rival, is not even able to say out loud her worst worries. The fear of not being deserving and enough for Seth, the alpha man. But Toby, that is the androgynous Cinderella who has not lost her modesty, kindness, and diligence, is finally chosen by the alpha man, and she achieves her personal happy ending, an ending fairy tale-like, with wedding ceremony included. The skillful woman, which demonstrated an equal blend of masculine authority and feminine nurturing, ends up like in a teen comedy when the ugly girl is chosen and preferred to her younger and prettier rival. Yet, the outcome of Toby's fate tweets to a romantic tragedy when Seth disappears and is given up for dead. Toby cannot recover from the grief she feels over her husband's death. Several months after Seth's death, she discovers she has a cancer and goes to the forest to commit suicide before being painfully terminal. Ironically blurring the limits between dystopias and romantic novels, Atwood gives a love story ending to Toby, demonstrating that human happiness is only achieved at an individual level. This quite conventional ending, that girl meets a boy and lives happy until the end, until death, has, however, a final hint of transgression in the form of female agency and movement towards drama. Toby could not choose to retain the ownership of her body when she was raped, but she decided when it's time to die. The three fertile women, Amanda, Wren, and Sweet Fox, are the first mothers of hybrid Quaker human descendants, but with the exception of the last one, this was not a conscious and voluntary decision. Both Amanda and Wren are raped. When Amanda, who was so traumatized that she was almost catatonic, and Wren are sexually assaulted by the Quakers, both ask Toby to help them, but the major cultural misunderstanding, never named as rape, is done. Forgiveness and understanding are applied, compromising women's rights. The rights of the assaulters to their own culture or ignorance are privileged over women's right to be safe. It seems that any difference in cultural patterns is always sanctioned to women's detriment. This controversy reminds of our present reality in the debate between feminism and multiculturalism. It is what Sheila Ben Habib explains as the liberals' dilemma, as we can see in this quotation. This is the argument brought about by the cultural defense strategy in legal cases involving immigrants from non-Western cultures. There is a clash resulting from the interaction of distinct cultural groups' coexistence that leads to the question posed by some feminist thinkers. That is multiculturalism bad for women? The issue of accepting as mitigating circumstances that one's own culture justifies criminal actions like marriage by rape, parental suicide, or washing the family honor with murder has a consequence that doing justice to the defendant, injustice is done to the victims, as Ben Habib affirms. Amanda fears the genetic conditioning that a paintballer's descendant could have, and expresses her intention of killing the baby in case of its being totally human. Eventually, all the newborn are Quakers' children of the good rapists. When Amanda gives birth to a hybrid baby, she is suddenly recovered from her traumatic state of passivity and detachment. In this sense, motherhood is the magical tool that heals her from her trauma, and she becomes very fond of the newborn. The new society between humans and Quakers is born through and thanks to women's bodies. Curiously enough, only human women mate with the Quakers. There is no mention of any sexual relationship between human men and Quaker women. In other words, from a cultural perspective, is MaddAddam's rebuilding of the world leading to a better future for women? Fertile women's bodies are returned to nature's ownership. Amanda's and Ren's involuntary motherhood and happy acceptance of the hybrid children can be inferred as a patriarchal backlash to traditional gender roles. In MaddAddam's society, motherhood only brings happiness, even when it is not the result of free choice, and lack of motherhood, as is the case with Toby, calls for substitution and sadness. However, there's still too much uncertainty surrounding MaddAddam's near future for it to be idyllic. Toby encountered her personal happiness in her love relationship with Seth, and personal love is an element that is not shared between Quakers and humans. Women break traditional monogamy only for the conceptions, since they mate with 4 Quakers each time. But eventually, the nuclear heterosexual family, with its classical structure, is the proposed solution. Human women procreate with the Quakers, but they only find love and support in their fellow human beings. And I quote from the novel, Crozier and Wren, Shackleton is supporting Amanda, and Ivoryville has offered his services as soi-disant father to the Swift Fox twins, and she tolerates his help, unquote. Moreover, they do not know for sure whether hybridity will be possible beyond the first generation. In the long run, maybe the future will exclusively belong to the Quakers. Because, and I quote from the novel, a horse plus a donkey gives you a mule, but it's sterile, unquote. If the hybrid project fails, human beings will live only within Toby's and Black Beetle's chronicles, within language and memory. In sum, Toby's characterization, rather than breaking feminine and masculine stereotypes, is perpetuating them. Atwood's selection of an androgynous woman as the most skillful and resolute model of female in MaddAddam community can be seen as a reaffirmation of gender stereotypes. It is the young woman, the only one able to protect and defend the other women? However, like in a fairy tale, her narrative is still developed around the love story, a male-female encounter, and her final suicide does not seem enough to claim female agency. Even though the ending is still open, it does not seem either subversive or liberatory enough for MaddAddam to be labeled as a feminist dystopia or transgressive utopian dystopia in most terms. So based on the final ideological message and the story development, MaddAddam would become, in more terms, a non-so-transgressive dystopian utopia, rather than a transgressive utopian dystopia. The ending, even though it is not totally closed, is anything but hopeful for women. The only feminist achievement is to deprive human men from paternity in exchange for women conceiving hybrids out of any sentimental relationship. However, a woman's role is mainly to reproduce, and happiness is to be found only through motherhood, even after suffering one of the most traumatic events for a woman, as is the case with rape. So, as Colebrook affirms, one might say that it's easier to imagine the end of the world and the end of capitalism than it is to think outside the structuring fantasy of gender. So there is not any guarantee for the continuity of human life on Earth or even for the hybrid community stability, since in the end there are hints of the existence of violent humans in the surroundings. The irony is that showing such an undesirable future for humans, and specifically for women, makes our present look not so bad. And this is not the didactic purpose of any fiction in the field of utopianism. So thank you very much for your attention, and in case you are interested, you have here all the works I have cited in this presentation. Thank you very much again for your attention, and bye!